Hello, all. We are the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael,
And I am James.
and today we are discussing, well, I believe the third Doctor Who novel that we've gotten to.
Yeah, I believe it would have to be. We, of course, did the Wheel of Ice, or the Wheel in Ice, or whatever that was called, the second Doctor book, and we covered Monogra as well, a fourth Doctor novel.
Yeah, and today we are talking about The Man in the Velvet Mask, which is written by Daniel O'Mahony. It is the 19th novel of the VMAs, which is the Virgin Missing Adventures. It came out February 1996, and it's 250 pages. It also stars the first Doctor and Dodo, which is sort of an interesting combination.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very random combination. I cannot imagine there's more than three other books, honestly, that has the Doctor and Dodo. Honestly, this might be the only one. Any book with the Doctor and Dodo that might also have Stephen in it.
Yeah,
I
that's a
would
good point.
Yeah, I would really not be surprised if this was the only book with just the Doctor and Dodo.
And reading the plot, like Monogra did before, there's a little bit of a quote at the beginning. The triumph of virtue, the misfortunes of vice. Who said the play had to be like the book? 24 Macedor XXII. The TARDIS has landed in post-revolutionary France, or so it appears, but the futuristic structure of the new Bestal towers over a twisted version of Paris. And first Deputy Minsky, adopted son of the infamous Marquis de Sade, presides over a reign of terror that has yet to end. Revolutionary soldiers arrest an alien doctor as a curfew breaker. Dodo is recruited by a band of wandering players whose intentions are lost and pure. Deep in the dungeons of the Bastille, Prisoner Six tries desperately to remember who he is. And outside time and space, a gathering of aliens watch in horror as their greatest experiment goes catastrophically wrong.
That sounds like them Pageants.
Yeah, so this book, it's a different one. Yeah, so it does something to you. When we discussed Monogra, I sometimes had difficulty putting some of the ideas of the book into my own words. And, well, this has somewhat of a different vibe than Monogra. It's a lot darker. It's nowhere near as jovial in nature. There's more, I think, what would you say, esoteric elements of this?
Oh yeah, with the way that O'Mahony writes.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Daniel O'Mahony also wrote a book for the Virgin New Adventures titled Falls to the Shadow, which we haven't read, but it was one of the earliest Doctor Who books that we happened to pick up. And I do know that one, it's longer than the majority of the other Virgin New Adventures, and two, I've heard it's somewhat of a complex style of writing, at least a little more, well, just different. And after reading this, I can sort of imagine what that one might be like.
Yeah, I also happen to know off the top of my head that he wrote the Cabinet of Light, which is one of the Talos Doctor Who novellas, which came out in 2003. It was, I think, one of two novellas that, if I'm not mistaken, featured a nameless doctor. It's no doctor we recognize. It didn't say which doctor it was. It's just the doctor, which completely you can see completely fits in with how O'Mahony seems to write.
Yeah, sort of vague, and you're not always sure of exactly what's going on with the connections between characters. Certainly, this book can be, I don't know if aggravating is quite the right word, but it does take a bit for some connections to fully come into place, and some of them never entirely do, to be honest, at least not for me. I guess before anything, though, they were to go over the characters.
Yeah, and I'll just go over them briefly because at the end of the day, if you've read the book, you'll probably have your own takes. And by the way, we say this all the time, but it's especially for a book like this. If you've read the book, let us know your thoughts. I found this book extremely fascinating, and spoiler alert, I might actually have liked this book more than I liked Monogra. Now, I read this one two times, once last year, and basically all of it in a period of just 2 days, just 4 weeks ago or so, thereabouts, maybe sooner. especially the second time around, I found this book actually quite fascinating and certainly more approachable. But don't be surprised if you're doing a first read of this and you have no clues of what's happening or why or if. But the characters, besides, of course, the Doctor and Dodo, that this book gives us, and I'll just talk about them for a second. So if we use their name later on, you kind of know who they are. We have the main antagonist of the book, Minsky, the son of Marquis de Sade, who has ruled over revolutionary France for 10 years at this point, unopposed, which the Doctor found extremely interesting. The Doctor, by the way, was curious of this individual from the off because he was the only one who he did recognize. Because, of course, the Doctor first lands here, and it takes a while before you realize, oh, wait, something's not right about this. He thinks he says in revolutionary France, and that the revolution has currently been ruined by Napoleon, which, of course, is what happened in history. But no, the revolution is still going strong, and this strange Minsky character is ruling everything, and the Doctor wants to know who he is and why. We have Marquis de Sade, also known as Citizen Sade, who was a character in history I am not terribly familiar with. I know there's a lot of controversy with the what he wrote, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, sadism comes from his name, correct?
Yeah, he was a philosopher with a lot of very hot takes at the time. I mean, during the time of I guess the whole Enlightenment period, there was a lot of philosophy coming up with new and bold ideas that a lot of the I guess more conservative-minded folks and more conservative philosophies never would have dreamt of before. Yeah, Marquis de Sade had I think very much of a hedonistic perspective. I'll admit to not knowing a ton about his actual writings, but he has some famous ones out there. And I believe he was even in prison for some time due to the, I guess, extremity of his writings. So I have to imagine very much a fascinating individual in history.
This is correct. We have Prisoner 6, which is a name given to a masked prisoner being held in the cells of the Bastille. This character speaks very rarely, but when they do speak, they speak in kind of riddles. They don't seem to be of sane mind, exactly. Or maybe they're hyper sane. Either way, they don't seem right. They're just in this mask. They sit and they say things sometimes. And that's how they are. Or is it? We have the characters Daval and Brassic, who are members of the Phantomous Wandering Players. They're actors. And in fact, those aren't even their names. In this wandering troupe, the actors and whatnot take the names of the characters they're playing, and they use their names as their actual names throughout practicing and, of course, leading to the main performance of the play. And we see a lot of them throughout the book. Leading the Phantomous Wandering Players is, of course, Phantomas, who is this very serious individual who a lot of people in the Wandering Players seem to respect, but also kind of fear, just because of how much I suppose he gets into his role as the main writer and adapter of the plays. I don't know, he's kind of strange, and we learn a lot more about them later on. We have Citizen Cameo, who is a guard of the Bastille Dancings, who is the one who, in some ways, names the masked prisoner, Prisoner 6. And I'll admit, guard Cameo, I've read it twice. I do not understand where she's coming from. We were in her point of view 4 or 5 times throughout the book, and I still don't really understand her. So if you've read this and you understand her, please let me know what her thing is, because I don't get it. We have, and I'll tell you right now, Mahoney is not the French name. We have Catherine Aurore, maybe Aurore, not so. They are someone who the Doctor meets early on in the book, and then we see them later on in the book, and I don't want to say too much more, because we are going to be talking about some spoilers, but I don't want to spoil everything. So I'll leave the mystery to you to enjoy. The book's only 250 pages. Go to Internet Archives. All the missing adventures just have a document or whatnot on Internet Archives, and you can literally read them all online. Much cheaper than buying the books, for the record. We have Gauss and Sir Randolph Egan, who are two spies from England. Of course, this is taking place in France. These are English spies because England and a lot of the rest of the world are actually about to instigate a war against revolutionary France. And these are two spies to help make sure that comes to pass. But these spies are also not only working for England, they are also working for the mysterious Pageant. We see a couple of members of the Pageant throughout, and we'll get more into the Pageant later on. The Pageant are the aforementioned aliens who are watching the experiment go awry that Michael mentioned in the plot. The members of the Pageant we must get familiar with are Larkspur and Till Hourglass, which is a really beast name. And later on in the book, we meet the Mambo Robin Goldfallow. And you might think, hey, those are mighty interesting names. And you wouldn't be wrong, but we'll get to that a bit later. But those are basically all of the characters who are worth a mention. If you bring up any other characters, I mean, there was Sophie, I suppose, whose death kind of did instigate a lot of things. But besides Sophie, who was another actress of the acting guild, but they only survive for like 20 pages, then they die, and things happen. This is really what happens in this book, basically.
Yeah, there's only a handful of things I myself wanted to mention. I mean, I didn't dislike the book. I do think it's possible that James enjoyed it more than I did. And to be fair, like he said, he's read it twice now, whereas I've just read it the once. I imagine that reading it again, knowing some of what I know about some of the characters, would increase my, I guess, understanding of some of the scenes. So it's probably worth rereading at some point. But for the time being, I thought it was a decent book, just a bit confusing at times.
Yeah, I think a second read of this extremely helps because it recontextualizes everything that we learn later on, and you'll be able to see what's being hinted at a lot sooner. And so instead of having your heart pounding from trying to understand things, you see things as they're playing out, knowing where it's going. And I do think that helps a lot, especially with a book like this one.
One of the first things that was interesting to me, like the plot of the book says, and if you know anything about the first Doctor's time, he's traveling right now with just Dodo after Stephen has left at the end of what would that have been?
I believe, yeah, it would have been the Savages.
Yeah, which is a story that we have not listened to or seen any telesnap reproductions of or anything of the sort. So this is very late in the first Doctor's time, and he is noticeably very feeble and weak throughout a lot of this story. Like the opening scene in the TARDIS has Dodo walking into the council room and seeing the Doctor lying on a chair thinking he's dead. That's sort of what you're going to be in for a lot of this novel when it comes to the first Doctor. There's a scene early on in which Dodo and he leave the TARDIS, and he's trying to lock the TARDIS door, but he's having trouble. First he drops the key, he's able to pick it up, and he's having trouble maneuvering the key. He's having difficulty with it. And Dodo goes to assist him, and the Doctor gets really pissed off. It's like, hey, I am not feeble. Let me do this. And that scene, especially since it's at the beginning, just really sort of shows his mindset. The Doctor knows that he's not doing well. The Doctor knows that his time's coming. But he knows he's weak, but he can still do this if he just gives himself time to do so. Throughout the book, he takes time to rest. Like I think he falls asleep on the floor as like there's a body above him. Like he has to have time to explore it. At one point later on in the book, he actually just straight up collapses, and he's able to get back up and able to function. But he's just not doing well. His health is very poor, and I think it's really fascinating, especially since throughout most of this book, Dodo is off with these wandering players as opposed to helping him around. So the Doctor, despite being as weak as he is, has to find a way to, I guess, manage to get through.
Yeah, and of course, this book, that's what our classic Who would like to do. The Doctor and Dodo get separated, and I don't have the exact pages in front of me, but the book is 250 pages. I would say the Doctor and Dodo get separated, page 16, 17, 18. And keep in mind, this had two introductions, neither of which the Doctor appeared in. So we see them together at the beginning, and then we might see them get reconnected page 240 at the bust. They are separated 90% of this novel.
And that type of thing happens all the time in classic Who. Companions get separated and they wind up on different factions and opposing sides of whatever thing is going on. So the Doctor is in a situation where he's exceptionally weak. I mean, like I said, he's literally collapsing at times. But he has to try to find the inner strength to get through, figure out this very confusing mystery about what went wrong in revolutionary France. And he's just not at his best. So I think it's a element that adds a lot of additional interest to this toy.
Yeah, that's a Halberny thing, that he actually gets arrested. And that's part of what causes the separation from Dodo. He gets arrested by the Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah, for breaking curfew, and that's another thing worth mentioning. Because when he's arrested, he tries to play it off initially that he's like a superior, like sort of like he's a military commander, saying, "Hey, unhand me, what are you doing?" The type of thing that we've seen him do in previous toys, if my recollection is not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, did he not just ambush an officer in Revolutionary France in the Reign of Terror?
Yeah, I imagine he did. And he certainly has the attitude for it when he's able to. The problem is right now he's so weak that he ends up stuttering and mumbling half his words, and he just comes across as an old, enfeebled man, to be honest. And that type of thing, given the type of independence the Doctor has, the fact that his body itself is sort of not working with him, I have to imagine only adds to the, might be melodramatic, but the inner torment that he's sort of going through.
Yeah, no, his body's literally betraying him. This is a tactic the first Doctor and most incarnations of the Doctor would be able to use rather easily. But he's not able to use it as much anymore because he's just weak. And it's no fault of his, it's just he's getting old.
Yeah, and like I said, he knows his time's coming. In fact, early in the book, he's sort of angry at Dodo for not leaving when Stephen did, because he knows his time's coming. He doesn't want Dodo to be there when it does.
Yeah, not only does he say that, he also says that Dodo is like Susan through a dark, broken mirror or something like that.
That's another thing. He sometimes forgets names and such, and he's just generally not in the best place he's been. I think it just adds a little extra and mildly interesting element to it.
Oh yes, but he is in 1804 France, so maybe it is the best place he's been.
And for Dodo's own toy, she gets separated with, as James mentioned, it would have been characters named Dalville and Brassic, who are just a couple of players in the sort of traveling troupe of performers. And I think the back of the book says, they have lasting and pure intentions, which I think is really only true of one of them. And it's sort of interesting. I mean, to be honest, I was sort of less interested in those portions of the book, primarily just because I don't really know Dodo that well. Out of like a lot of the classic Who companions, Dodo's among the ones I know the least about. I just don't have much experience with her. So since it's not a character I know that well and I can particularly have much in the way of memory of, it's sort of hard to get out too invested in her own story, which largely has to do with her. Well, I guess you could argue like a coming of age type thing.
Yeah, it basically is her coming of age story. And to be fair, I would say that I don't know how much you could have gleaned from Dodo from the TV series. Even if he had seen every single story she was in and we have not, I still don't know how much you gleaned from Dodo. You might glean more from Dodo in this book than you did the entire time she was on the series. That's very possible. According to Saxon in this book, she grew up extremely poor in poverty, and when her parents died or when her mother died or whatnot, she was taken in by an aunt who lived in, if not upper class, certainly middle class, higher middle class life. And so, according to her, in some ways, she's been acting all her life, which is kind of good because in the play they're performing, the actress who was going to be one of the main stars, Sophie, as mentioned previously, got arrested and then murdered. Not, for the record, murdered by the people who arrested her, but murdered by Gauss and so Robert Eaglin, who were doing some ceremony to contact the Pageant, which it's common. But
On
so
a side note, I sort of find it funny. The Pageant's like, hey, we don't even need you to use that blood magic. What are you doing, bro?
yeah, and they said something like, "Oh, the ancient customs must be done," because I don't know if they know or not. It's how to tell this book is kind of esoteric. But Gauss and Sorabo and the other guy, they claim that the Pageant are demons and people from hell, but I kind of get the sense they know they're not. But I don't know. It's difficult. Either way, that was kind of funny. But because Sophie is missing at the very least, Phantomus just comes out of his cabin, looks at Dodo, tells Dodo that Caesar will be the new Sophie, and then he just walks back in. And so Dodo is now kind of, in some ways, forced to being Sophie. And for the record, this play they're doing is based on one of the works of Marquis de Sade. So even I, who knows very little of his works, knows you probably do not want to be playing a woman in one of the plays based on his works.
Yeah, and it's with that noted that we should mention that this book has in the past had some controversy labeled against it. No, I won't pretend I've read much into it because I haven't, but I will say that Dodo's character in this book sort of goes through the ringer. This, I mean, I would say for the most part, nothing exceptionally bad happens to her aside from some stuff toward the end dealing with, like, I don't know, some type of infection, you could say.
I mean, honestly, that part's true, and that I think gets misconstrued by a lot of people and construed into something it didn't mean to be. But yeah, she witnesses a pretty surprising and saddening death of one of the people she grew close to while she was there. She was there for about, what, 3 days or so? 3-4 days?
Yeah, it would have been about the equivalent of 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, so the book takes over about 3-4 days, maybe 5 if it's stretching it. So it takes place over a pretty short period of time on the whole. But yes, somebody she grew close to ended up getting killed in a very saddened scene. So I suppose he witnessed that. But yeah, besides that, on the whole, like, her time wasn't all that bad.
Some of the things that she goes through are more, as Jim sort of alluded to with the Marquis de Sade play, a little more adult in nature. She actually, and this is sort of a random thing to be in a Doctor Who book, she loses her virginity at a point in this book, which is why I referenced earlier it's somewhat of a coming of age type story. So there's some material like that. Honestly, I was sort of expecting it based on just the vague things I had heard about it online. I was sort of expecting it to be a bit worse, to be honest. Like I thought there were going to be worse things happening to her during the performance of the play, just as it go that way, thank God. But I was sort of expecting worse, so I just wanted to mention, though this book is controversial in some circles, reading it, I honestly don't think it's, as far as that type of material goes, I certainly don't think it's all that bad.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of, and this is ignoring the end, because I know that's one part of the controversy. One, Dodo showed up in Who Killed Kennedy as actually quite a big character in the book, and some things happen during that book which are unfortunate, and that sometimes gets combined with this book, and I think that's part of the problem, that people kind of in their minds think that things that happen in Who Killed Kennedy actually happen in this one, and they just combine them. And so, honestly, in this book, as Michael said, it's a coming of age story. For the most, it's just a young woman who is exploring and discovering her sexuality, which is natural as one grows up in life. Now, people might feel uncomfortable about it. People might not be expecting it in a Doctor Who book, but the Votes in Line always did kind of use these adult themes and explore things that could have been explored on the show. I mean, look at Monogra. You could get away with more in these books, and they did. And I don't think it's a bad thing. It's a young woman growing up. She, by choice, lost her virginity, and that's not wrong. Like, I don't know how old she is. Certainly, she's at least 18, 19, 20, so she's obviously within the legal age to do so. So, I mean, on those terms, you might feel uncomfortable thinking about it. You might look at Dodo from the 60s and not be able to reconcile in your mind, oh, wait, she's able to make that determination, but there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I agree with Michael, I was expecting much worse things to happen, but those are actually, if you're inclined towards some kind of sweet moments. It's not like it goes explicit, for the record. We see the scenes leading into it. So it's nothing explicit. It's rather nice on the whole. I agree with Michael, this wasn't my favorite part of the novel either. I much prefer the Doctor's explorations and trying to figure out what was actually going on, because he was actually able to make some progress. But even Dodo's able to make some progress on that. due to a discovery she makes. But either way, I thought this actually treated Dodo with a lot of respect, because it's not every book you give the female a lot of agency, and she had agency. No, it might not be the agency that we want her to have. She's not going around solving this entire mystery herself, but it's agency for her own life and the path it takes. And I think that is important, and I do think that matters. And certainly we've forgotten when talking about this book.
Yeah, so I guess my final thing would just be to say that if you've heard anything negative about that aspect of the book, I wouldn't let those types of comments color too much of your preconceptions coming into this one. I'll just honestly read it yourself, make up your own mind. But I certainly would avoid the book just because of that type of stuff.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this reminds me of the controversy that you see involving Stephen King's It, where there is a scene at the end of the book which gets lambasted to and fro in online spaces every single day, it seems like. And yet, maybe probably 90% of the people complaining about this scene in the book haven't read the goddamn book. They'll just, oh, this scene's in the book, look at it, it's discussion, how can this be in the book? They don't know any of the symbolism behind it. They haven't read theories about why it was in the book. They just, oh, it's bad, blah, blah, blah. And it's just this gestalt forming of a consciousness of, oh, this thing's in this book, that means this book's bad. Now, granted, this book is a lot easier. Well, maybe in some ways it's harder, with as rare as it is. But like I said, you can find it online. It's also not 1,000 pages like Stephen King's It. If you've heard things about this book, I would say just read it if reading's your thing. If reading's not your thing, do not read this. This should not be anybody's first introduction to reading. Like, I don't know, it would not be a good idea. I'm not untrained at reading, and I'm not sure it was a good idea for me to read it. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's pretty out there. But yeah, just read it for yourself. It's, like I said, 250 pages. Give yourself, well, I don't know how much time you have to read, but give yourself a week. And again, I think it treats Dodo with a lot of respect. Maybe more so than she actually got in the TV series. To me, she seems to have been one of the more forgettable companions. And like I said, this gives her agency. So I don't see how that's wrong. Even at the end, she's the one who made the choice and the acceptance of that choice. So nothing wrong here. But as Michael was saying earlier, the Doctor is quite weak throughout this story. In fact, I found this actually kind of hilarious. It was very disconcerting at first because I felt like I'd missed a page, but I get where it's coming from now. We start a section off, and this book, by the way, is divided into, I think, 10 chapters with very interesting chapter names. Actually, let me give you a chapter name right now, just so you have a taste. Some of the chapter names include such glorious ones as some minor alterations to the dialogue. If God really existed, it would be necessary to abolish him, which sounds so revolutionary French, it's not even funny. And Frenchmen, a further effort if you truly want to be Republicans. So, great chapters. And by the way, it's a very small point. It's kind of funny we're reading this after Monogra, which also had a quasi-Harvey Theodore theme going on with it.
Yeah, actually, there's more than a few connections, which, since we chose these books somewhat at random, sort of amused me.
Yes, this is very true. So those were some fun chapter names. But as I was saying, we start a section off with the Doctor who collapsed off screen. He's having heart problems. He's just on the ground trying to get his breathing back, trying to get back to normal, and trying to get himself to be able to stand up, which is a struggle for him more than once in this book. And during this struggle to try to regain himself, he thinks to himself what it would be like to have two hearts. And so, apparently, I don't remember which episode it was, in Classic Who at one point, it said the Doctor had one heart, because, of course, in Classic Who, for a while, they didn't have much conception of what being a Time Lord meant. Then, in the very first serial with John Pertwee, Spared from Space, we learn that the Doctor has two hearts. And this book reconciles that, saying that you don't get the second heart, Time Lords do not get the second heart until Regeneration, the very first one, which I actually think fits very well. I think it makes a lot of sense. Much like the John Pertwee tattoo, perhaps being the mark of an exile that is then removed once they are no longer exiled. The thing about two hearts only after having one regeneration completely makes sense to me. I don't know, something about it just feels right. And even a later book, one of the new adventures for the seventh Doctor, Christmas on a Rational Planet, also mentioned there's this war that you get the Hout after regeneration. So I think that's kind of fun. I think that's nice. I do think it's interesting because, of course, all of this is now out the window because if the Doctor's the timeless child, they have already regenerated multiple times. So does the second Hout, can that be reset? Can the Time Lords reset that? Is there even a Time Lord thing, or is it a timeless child thing that was somehow physiologically grafted to the Time Lords? Ask Chibnall, he won't be able to answer you. There's no way he has an answer for that. But yeah, so that makes absolutely no sense with the timeless child information, but almost nothing does. So I guess it's par for the course. But no, I mean, the Doctor being weak and having all these troubles, that actually led to a scene you quite liked, didn't it, Michael?
Yeah, so James mentioned the characters earlier. The architect, or the seeming architect and leader of this period in France, is a character named Minsky, who is said to be the son of Marquis de Sade. And I don't know exactly if you know how old he is. He's like, what, 12 or 13? That's sort of how I envisioned him.
Yeah, which is very confusing because he's said to have ruled basically on a pause for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And yet, I'm not sure he aged. But to be fair, he is kind of a mythical figure to the revolution and citizens around the country. So they might kind of just take that as a matter of fact. We even hear that there are rumors about him being born of giants and all of this stuff, which funnily enough, he might have spread some of those rumors just to make sure nobody knows his origins.
Yeah, it's the type of thing in which almost the myths around the character sort of give the actual individual almost more of an amorphous feel. Like you don't really, or only like a handful of people actually know anything about the actual Minsky. So it's in a way a pretty good protection.
Yeah, not only is it good protection, that fact, but it also gives you more power. Not that he really needed it, but he wanted it.
I think it even implied that he controlled the British government.
No, it implied that he, in some ways, he controlled everything. Rereading his character was some of my favorite parts of rereading the book because I find Minsky so fascinating as a character. I mean, this whole book has a lot of interesting things going on in it, but Minsky and his scenes are some of my favorite.
Yeah, and Minsky is an exceptionally cruel individual. In a way, sort of encapsulates a lot of the sadism that would be associated with his father. And there's a scene in which he and the Doctor are talking, and Minsky is literally using human beings who contort themselves as furniture. He's doing this in front of the Doctor, and the Doctor is absolutely, as you can imagine, he's absolutely appalled at the way he's treating these people with such inhumanity. But the Doctor is also at such a bad state, like James said, he's even having heart problems at one time. He's in such a bad place that he almost considers sitting down because he's having difficulty standing up. And standing up for prolonged periods, trying to talk to Minsky, that's taking a lot out of him. He's able to fight against that temptation, and luckily Minsky gets cowed away. I think he collapses later. But that scene, I think it's just another indicative scene of the Doctor's trials and what he's going through.
And before we discuss the joys of the Pageant, and for the record, we usually don't spoil too much, but there are some very important things that I really see no way around spoiling. So when we discuss the Pageant, that's when the spoilers come. I did want to just mention quickly that Daniel O'Mahony was going to write a follow-up to this book. I think he suggested this one to BBC, so it would have been after Vortin was no longer publishing Doctor Who. But it was going to be, according to the TARDIS Wiki, a black comedy historical set in 1916 called Viet Cong. And there sounds like there's about 2,000 things wrong with this. Honestly, I don't like saying that it's going to not have some Doctor Who media, but this is a Doctor Who media we might not have needed.
I think O'Mahony had somewhat of I guess his time writing novels, some of them came across as more questionable in nature. I know Forest of the Shadow has some detractors. Naturally, this one does too. Now, the idea of a black comedy historical thing called Viet Cong, I just wouldn't even know what you think of that. I wonder what Doctor that would have been. Might be interesting to know.
I think the idea was a first Doctor one. I think.
I guess if it's a sequel to this, then it sort of makes sense. Naturally, it would have been interesting to read, but I also think that how do I phrase this? You can only write so many things before people might want to just move on to other potentially more accessible material, which is not to say anything negative about any particular writer, but I think one of the nice things about Doctor Who in terms of the books is the variety of writers. I mean, when you talked about the Wheel of Ice, I mean, Stephen Baxter was an actual engineer, which is why some of his stuff came across as very, I don't know, technical at times. And Marley, who did Monocra, came from more of a fantasy background. So it's interesting when people bring in their own type of character to the writing. So it would have been interesting to read, but I just think it would be just interesting to see the next guys writing Doctor Who and see what they bring to the table.
And that's very well said, because one of the things that O'Mahony brings to the table is a very ambiguous style of writing. And that is no more prevalent in this book than it is when we are introduced to the Pageant. And like I said, there's going to be some spoilers for things that we don't learn into the books about halfway over. I'm not going to spoil everything, but the basis of what's going on in this period of France and why is important enough that I think it is worth quote unquote spoiling. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, I would stop now and go find the book online. The Pageant appear around, I would say, 3 times throughout the novel. They have about 3 scenes, maybe 4 scenes. And they're referenced by a couple of other characters because, like we said earlier, they're in conversation with some of the characters here. And when we are first introduced to the Pageant, this is the introduction Daniel O'Mahony decided we needed to have. The dancers came slowly in small groups, wearing ancient and honorable faces. King Mab was first, then the Ace of Spades, Jack Frost, Chaos and Old Knight, Coyote the Trickster, many kings under the hill, Dr. Faustus, Zeno's Arrow, the Wandering Jew, Ahriman, 2 nameless gods of Old Carcosa, Dudley Nightshade, Janus, Child Roland, a gaggle of lesser saints, Don Juan, Kali the Destroyer, Robin in the Horde, the Lavos, the Devil, the Deep Blue Sea, and 100 others. From pantheons and legends, myths, folklore, alchemy, and infant science, they came. The masks were paper thin, held with glue and gaudy paint. As they spilled onto the dancing floor, the colors began to melt, trickling down onto the robes of sackcloth and rattan leather. The many colors merged into form a dirty grey. It was a tawdry, pitiful affair. Only the 3 graces, liberty, equality, and fraternity, retained their dignity.
Yeah, so when some people might say this doesn't always have the most accessible material, it's introductions like that which would lead some to that conclusion. When I was reading that passage, my eyes sort of glazed over a handful of times. I had to go back and start at the beginning again. And like James said, they pop up a handful of times, and it's not exactly clear for quite a bit what these things even are, like what be them. So yeah, it's just one of those joys of such. And I think, James, you did some more research into this whole Pageant thing, if I recall.
Well, I found them among the most fascinating parts of the book. And this is why there has to be spoilers to this section, because we can barely talk about the Pageant without talking about what the connection is to the events of the book and why they matter. The Pageant seem to be comprised of extra-dimensional beings who kind of wear masks to give themselves form, I would say. They seem to, in a lot of ways, just be emotional light beings who only take physical shape if they have a mask on. That's at least the best I can gather. And if you can gather more, by golly, you can let us know. But I enjoy what the TARDIS Ricky mentions for the Pageant. It talks about, due to Daniel O'Mahony's focus on ambiguity and surrealism, the full scale and final details of the Pageant's culture is not made clear. Which, yeah, you can say that's pretty much the case. They pretty much sums up, Rick. Those in the Pageant seem to be called mask masters, and mask makers as well is another term that comes up. And what is going on, why they are connected to the events in this book that the Doctor is experiencing, is that the Pageant, who have such ungodly powers that they're able to do this, they took oath out of time and took it to a pocket universe because they wanted to experiment with, how do they pit it? It was some pretentious bullshit. But maybe that's what Daniel O'Mahony does, to be honest. The doctor has a discussion with one of the people who proposed this idea and was in charge of instigating it. That person's name would be Robin Goldfarlow. And here's a small snippet of the conversation. It's, I think, one of the most fascinating conversations in the book. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's well worth reading almost just for this. Because it's just one of those things that's hard for me to quite parse even exactly what's going on. But according to Robin Goldfarlow, we identified a certain trend in human thought and history. We traced the trend to one symptomatic epoch where its arguments and contradictions were enacted through human agency. Specifically, Revolutionary Year 2, the Reign of Terror, and the trend was apparently reason. What happened is they found Marquis de Sade and they offered him, I suppose, a place in this experiment, and they removed Earth from normal. This is back to the quote, just so you don't think I have such great master of the English language. We physically removed the Earth from normal space and reconfigured it inside a pocket universe, rebuilt entirely within a machine that would regulate and control the physical nature of the world. The mass latter of the terror generated enough electromagnetic energy for that purpose. The war machine will be run by a genetically engineered operator that will be programmed with an epistemic code based on our humans' philosophies and ideas. The new history will be created through the operator, through the war machine. We set it up and set back to watch. And when questioned about this, the doctor says, hey, there are laws against this kind of thing. And the doctor said, no, he's probably wrote some of them. Because apparently we learned in Carnival of Monsters, he was involved in writing some laws. And the guy replies, hey, last time you serve the interests of the makers. Which is a very, nice. Yeah, well, it's a nice, well, one, that's true. But it's also a complete hand-waving. They basically did it because they could. Because they have such godlike abilities, they can literally just do something like this as a plain experiment. As it is, he finishes saying that the project wasn't designed to harm humans. Quote, we just wanted to see what they would do if things were different, but it went wrong. The human we used, his epistemic code corrupted the system. The system operator became perverted, developed independence, seized control of the machine. My tribe retreated to the arches of this world. So what happened? The Pageant set this huge, honestly, just this huge experiment into fruition. They lost control of the experiment and were forced outside of the experiment. They lost all control over it. And the systems operator who was corrupted, that's who Minsky is. Minsky has a way to control the quote-unquote world machine, what controls the physical nature of the world. As Minsky himself says, and Minsky had a lot of great lines, as Minsky says earlier in the book, imagine that you woke up one day and found you didn't need to breathe. Wouldn't you keep up the pretense of breathing, if only to comfort your lungs? I run an imaginary military, an illusory economy, a fictional bureaucracy. I've made them all redundant. My power is invisible. So Minsky was great fun. I didn't know systems operators could be so cool. Makes me wish I could have gotten into coding. And the objective for the record of this entire experiment by the Pageant was to explore the relationship between individual psychology and the historical dynamic. And that is certainly what I'm going to be writing my next college essay on next time I go to college.
I guess you could pick worse topics.
You probably could. But so this whole thing is a failed experiment that's just going wrong. And the worst thing is that, as mentioned earlier, England and the rest of the world are about to wage war against revolutionary fronts. But Minsky's completely aware of this. In fact, he was one of the instigators from the war behind the scenes. He kind of convinced these countries to attack France. And Minsky's whole plan, which we're not going to get into because at the end of the day, we have to leave some things for you. Let's just say that he knows more than he ever lets on. And he's planning for things beyond what even the doctor could comprehend. So there was a lot of fun things involving Minsky and what his overall plans were. And so the Pageant is this monstrosity of power that at the end of the day doesn't even, I mean, they kind of apologize, but when the Doctor talks to the quote-unquote three graces, whatever that means, which let me tell you, it doesn't tell you. You shouldn't expect this to tell you anything about the Pageant more than what we're telling you, basically. And I'm going on about this just because I found them completely fascinating. At the end of the book, the three graces introduce themselves to the Doctor and just let the Doctor know, yeah, we'll pay Earth back to where it belongs. We can't say that theirs is a good history, but it's their history, so it's what they'll have to live with. The Doctor tells them, hey, there cannot be any more experiments like this. And they're just bemused about it, because really, what power does the Doctor actually have over these people? Keep in mind, right now, he is still technically on the run from his species, so it's not like he can go back to Gallifrey right now and say, hey, you need to look at this Pageant people. And the Pageant, all the members of the Pageant that we see who interact with the Doctor, I'll call him my lord, which just kind of frustrates him. And they obviously have some knowledge of the Doctor's Time Lord heritage. And one of the funniest things about it, and I won't tell you what character is making these protests, because, again, some things have to be saved for the reading. But talking to the Doctor, the character says, I wouldn't trust them to keep the word. Angels aren't bound by promises or morals. They do as they please. They made no promises. The Doctor replies that they made no promises. And the reply to that is, that's the only reason I'm inclined to trust them at all. So obviously, these beings have way too much power. They can basically do anything. They moved out of Earth. Maybe they are Time Lords. Who knows? Maybe they were Time Lords after they got rid of reality itself, as they wanted to do during the whole thing. But yeah, I just found the interactions with the Pageant so mystifying and yet so interesting, which I'm sure is exactly what Daniel O'Mahony is going for. I'm not really big into surreal writing. There's a writer out there called Chris Adrian, and I'm sure he's written more than what I've read, but I've read two of his books, one being Gob's Grief, and the other being The Children's Hospital. Gob's Grief, I probably read much too young to understand anything in it. And so I read it again about 4 years back or so. I understood more of it, not all of it. It's one of those books that I would say is a literary novel. When I use that term, it means it's not written for me. It's written for book critics. It's written for those in fields of writing, of fiction, which I am not a part of. I read books, hopefully to just enjoy them. I don't need a lot of metaphors or anything like that. I don't need that in my writing. I actually, on the whole, find it distracting. But Gob's Grief I quite liked. The other one, The Children's Hospital, I read it once, and the only way I will ever read that thing again is if I am doing a read with somebody who is experienced in the book and who can talk me through it, because I did not get any of it. It's 600 pages, and perhaps I didn't read it under the best circumstances, but it was a book that was as confusing as hell. I found the theme strange. I didn't really get it. And in some ways, that's what this book feels like. That's what Daniel O'Mahony feels like. I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to Forest the Shadow, because like Michael said, Forest the Shadow is 350 pages?
The number that comes to my mind is 341, so I suspect it's somewhere around there.
Yeah, and most of these books were only around 250, 230, maybe 270. And this is a whole 100 pages more. So I'm not sure what Forest the Shadow is going to bring to us, but I guess we're not going to need to worry about that for a while. One last thing about the Pageant, and this has been your Pageant time with the Brothers from Honey. This is Doctor Who. The Pageant were actually mentioned in another novel. They were mentioned in The Quantum Archangel, written by Craig Hinton, which came out 2001. And it's just a throwaway line. They weren't any main characters or anything, but they were mentioned to have been participants in some war that happened a millennia ago, which we learn about in that novel. So I think that's kind of interesting. Also, one of the people who participated in that were Faxon Paradox, which is a name that you recognize if you're looking through some of these 90s Doctor Who novels, but I know nothing about, and in some ways I'm very afraid to find out.
That's actually a good way to describe my feelings about expanded Doctor Who media. Like when I think about things like Irish Wild Time or the Faction Paradox,
I'm
or
looking forward to the 8-day empire, or however
what,
that was
yeah, what,
called.
yeah, whatever the hell that means. But the complexity of, I mean, even the War in Haven, which I think is the thing that goes throughout the Eighth Doctor Adventures, the
Yeah, I
EDAs.
believe yeah, that would be 8th Doctor Adventures.
So there's some very, what I would imagine, complex things coming up that hopefully with the way we're doing it, we'll slowly be introduced to some of these ideas. It won't be too bad. But there are just some things coming up that I'm just not sure exactly what you think of right now.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
no,
we're not there yet, and it doesn't really matter right now. But if I recall, wasn't the Quantum Archangel like a sequel to the Time Monster?
yes, it was a sequel to the Time Answer, which even that one, my brother and I didn't really particularly like all that much. We've only seen it once, but it's one of those Doctor's toys that just felt over long to me.
That's because it showed the same scene 6 times in slow motion.
I mean, that might very well be part of it. I truly do not remember much about it. But yeah, no, later Doctor Who novels during that era seem like they get very esoteric. It seems like it uses conceptual ideas that writers of the show probably couldn't even conceive of. There are out there things that are going to show up in these novels, and I'm not convinced my brother and I are the right people to talk about them, but by golly, we're going to give it our best shot when we get there.
Yeah, and before we give our final thoughts on this, I've referenced before that this is later in the first Doctor's time. But James, if you wanted to go specifically into the timeline of this, that might be interesting.
Well, as listeners to this podcast know, the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each Doctor, including the extensive extended media, ranging from the comic books, comic strips, Big Finish, and BBC audio, the multiple book ranges, and everything in between. Doctor Who canon, insofar as it actually has one, is a jumbled mess and has been forever. So I just like to see where this toys with this casting fit into the universe as a whole, as continuity and the narrative timeline has always been of interest to me. And this one is a rather simple placement on the whole. TV-wise, it takes place in between the Savages and the War Machines, which is the only place it could take place. And this is actually the first listed story to take place after the Savages, which is the departure of Stephen, which, as Michael said earlier, we haven't actually listened to that one yet. It's one of the last ones. Although I believe that's the one that they're animating right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we saw that, a couple month ago.
Within
My
the
concept of time is amorphous, so.
Maybe you are the perfect person to be reading some of these books then.
Well, I think it's more that we've been sick for like the past week, so.
Oh yeah, no, we've had a terrible week in terms of sickness.
Which, on a side note, to anyone who's gotten this far, if it ever sounds like my voice is scratchy, that's probably why, bro.
Yeah, so this takes place right after the Savages, if not right after in terms of how the Doctor and Dodo experience it. There's at least no choice listed in between. And right after this book, we have another book, well, a short story from a book, Townist Image, which is a short story from Decalogue 3, Consequences, which was another Virgin publication. The Decalogue says, was the very first Doctor Who short story anthology series. The Decalogue says, the first 3 Decalogues were all involving the Doctor. The last 2 was after Virgin lost the rights, so they do not actually have the Doctor appearing in them, but they have characters from the Doctor Who universe in them. But Townist Image is a short story from the 3rd volume, which is subtitled Consequences, which came out in July of 1996. So what, a couple of months after this one?
Yeah, because this is early '96, so yeah, it would have been.
Yeah, so you never know, and we do not actually own any of the Decalogues. I almost bought them on eBay once, but I stopped myself. I need to save some money. So we don't own any of the Decalogues, but if this was written after The Man in the Velvet Mask, maybe it even makes a reference to it. It probably doesn't. It's probably placed for other reasons, but it would be nice to think it did. But like I said, it probably doesn't. But yeah, no, that's just where it fits in the timeline. Nice and simple, in between just a plain episode from the classic series and a nice Decalogue. And where else could you about to fit in life?
I guess that's one way to see it. But when it comes to The Man in the Velvet Mask, like I said earlier, I didn't have a bad time with it. I would even say I had an indifferent time. I thought some of the ideas were interesting. It's just that sometimes the material, James talked about the Pageant quite a bit. And I found the Pageant interesting in theory, but it just wasn't the easiest information to try to get a grasp on. So because some of the ideas here are a bit more vague or enigmatic, it's just not as easy to say, yeah, I actually had a good time reading it. I did appreciate that, I guess, darker feel of this hard, and certainly I like the mystery. My favorite portion being the Marquis de Sade thing and his relation with Minsky. And there are some clues about Marquis de Sade's, I guess, I would just say true character, but there are some clues early on that I caught on to, and I was happy to see that, hey, I was right toward the end of the book because it takes that long to get to. So there are some nice things like there's some small mysteries. Not all the portions of the book are interesting to me, but I mean it's also only 250 pages. It's not like most of these are particularly long novels. So in that way, you don't need to invest much time in them. But sometimes with the material, it can sometimes come across as challenging. But I enjoyed it. I'll probably read it again at some point. But for now, I can't say that I absolutely loved it one way or the other. It's just, I guess for me, it's probably a lot more of an interesting oddity than anything else.
For my case, like I had mentioned, I actually, on the whole, because perhaps it was shorter, I liked this more than I liked Monogra. Now, I liked Monogra on the whole a lot. I thought they had a very interesting dark fantasy feel to it. But the thing is that went way more down into technobabble science than this one did. This one had some strange things in it. But Daniel O'Mahony apparently may be saving this for Faust Sado. He was in a technobabble mood. So besides the little quotes I read to you earlier, that was really it in terms of things that were strange. And there were some things in this fake France that was strange, like they had steam power when apparently they would have had steam power at the time. And so obviously they were technology that they had that they sort of have, but that wasn't the main point of the book. And so I don't know, I found this, it's strange to say that this was more digestible, especially when the first page, which is just this prologue entitled If, to the point of view of somebody dying who we don't know who it is, and it doesn't really explain anything. That was another way of doing this how the novel. But like, especially on reread, the whole thing just works so well for me. I think I kind of get what Daniel O'Mahony is going for, even if I was not the intended audience for this novel. And I'll just end it. We mention every now and then, especially when talking about books, about how important it is for the Doctor's character and the companion's character to be encapsulated. This was a small section when the Doctor's in the jail cell, and this is just a small section of when he's in that cell. A soul was a soul was a soul. That was a truth the Doctor had learned through hard experience. This is better than some. It was hardly luxury, hardly squalor. The design was basic, functional, but not barbaric. 4 walls, bad, even a wash basin. It lacked imagination, but no so required imagination. It was roomy, holding as much space as every other prison the Doctor had known. Not enough. And I just think that really encapsulates, especially the first Doctor. As he says later to a Soul companion, Souls exist to keep the outside out. The very nature demands our escape. A locked door exists only to be unlocked. And honestly, I can think of no better way to describe the first Doctor. This is somebody who, just through pure will, and we see that throughout this book, he can barely stand, and yet he resists the urge to sit down because he's not going to fall into one of Minsky's depraved ideas, because he refuses to do it. He'll let his hatred, as he says at one point, be his cane. And so I think this is maybe not the best first Doctor book that's probably ever going to be written, although I have to imagine it's going to be better than some other one. But I do think this really captures the first Doctor very well, and that's why I find the first Doctor scenes some of my favorite portions of the book. And like I said, as for Dodo, perhaps the so could even capture her well. So really this book had a full feel to play around with, and I thought it did good with the character they decided to give Dodo. I think it captured Dodo the best that I was going to capture her in the way that it wanted to. So on the whole, I don't know, I think that the book just worked for me better than it probably had any right to. And hey, I'm not going to complain about me liking the book. I know it's controversial, the book on the whole, but I'm not sure it's controversial for great reasons. And some people who are aware of the controversy might say, hey, but we didn't even discuss the controversy because Dodo got AIDS or blah, blah, blah. And she didn't. That's the joys of the book. You're wrong. Read the book again. I personally do not think that whole encapsulation is a fair summation of the events of is past the end of the story. It's not giving Dodo her due.
It's probably partially one of the things that's been spread around for so long that even people who have had an experience with reading the book just spread it around themselves. So a lot of just uninformed stuff like that going on, which happens, and it just happens. It's unfortunate, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm not saying the book's perfect, and I'm not saying there aren't legit criticisms you could have about this book or the writing, or even in some ways how Dodo was treated. All I can say is, for me, I liked it more than I thought I ever would. It just really worked for me in a lot of ways, so I appreciate it on that level. If you have an extra week, find it online, give it a go, especially if you like the first Doctor. It's a great encapsulation of the first Doctor's character. But, Michael, what do we have coming up next on the Brothers Mahoney?
Yeah, next we are finally finishing up the first series of the revival with the two-parter Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways, which, as I'm sure you know, are the final 2 episodes starring Christopher Eccleston, which we haven't seen, at least I haven't seen in some time, so it'd be nice to revisit those. And yeah, we have that coming up next. Should be fun to tackle.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's been a while since I've seen both of these, and I remember that there were a certain antagonistic force that has a lot of quotable lines and more great Russell T Davies religion hate. It's unintentional, I think, in this case, but when it comes up, it is absolutely hilarious. But yeah, so that's going to be cool to see again. Plus, of course, Christopher Eccleston, first appearance of the end of David Tennant as the Doctor, who, of course, is one of the biggest names in Doctor Who, even nowadays. So it all comes from this one. So yeah, it's going to be nice to talk about this one afterwards.
That it will be. But as always, we hope that you enjoyed listening. If you have any comments about The Man in the Velvet Mask, please let us know. Like James said, this is one of those books that we would love to talk to other people about who have had experiences with it, especially if you've read it more than a handful of times. So please let us know what you thought about it. You can follow us on Twitter/X, or you could write something down below here on YouTube. But as always, very much appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to us. We're the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael.
And I'm James.
Thanks very much for listening. Have a nice one. Stay safe.
Praise Minsky.